Lawyers of Reddit, what is the nastiest, craziest divorce case that you've handled? I worked for a judge. Two prominent local news people had a divorce. They filed mutual restraining orders against each other for violence. The filings were vague on details, but still somehow conveyed a sense of Shiloh or Antietam levels of blood. When it came time for the hearing, it turned out the violence was spitting. More specifically, during a heated argument, flecks of spittle managed to touch the other party. Judge denied the restraining orders, and both parties' attorneys probably bought new yachts, such as Justice. Man, if they were both on TV at this time, you think their lawyers would have advised this is a bad idea. You were on screen the next day with no visible injuries, it's not going to go your way. Here's a story of a potential thwarted divorce case, told to me by our closing attorney. The man and his fiancée are buying a house together. They get to the paper where you sign off on all your aliases. The woman has a full page of former names. The guy asks, "What is this?" The woman nonchalantly says, "Oh, I've been married 5 times before." The guy gets up and walks out. Needless to say, they did not buy the house or stay together. You'd think that had come up before the setting down hundreds of thousands of dollars together phase of a relationship. I'm a child who dealt with parents getting divorced. When I was 7, I was forced to go to therapists to play games with them. My mother was trying to get custody and insisted it was a board game. It seemed innocent enough. I roll the dice, and the therapist picks up a card from his deck and asks me a question. When he rolled, I picked a card and asked him a question. My questions were simple for a 7-year-old. What's your favorite color? And whatnot. His questions were smart, tricky. How do you feel when mommy does this? And what do you think of daddy when this happens? So I sat there for an hour, 7 years old, playing this game. At the end, we left the room and met with my parents, and he said I would do better living with my mother. I specifically remember looking at the man and saying, "But I don't want to just live with mom. I want to live with dad too. Like I'm doing now. 1 week at mom's, 1 week at dad's." I'll never forget the way that the therapist basically ignored me and said that the game discussions showed that I'm happier with my mom. The look on my father's face was heartbreaking and he started to tear up. I remember as we were walking out of the place, my parents stopped in the parking lot to discuss things, and I stood there waiting for them to finish arguing. I remember getting so frustrated because they were talking about me in front of me. I stopped them and said, "Why didn't you just ask me what I wanted?" My mother looked quite stunned, and my dad seemed so relieved. I wound up doing 1 week at mom's and 1 week at dad's until I was 17 and went into college. Mondays I got on the bus at one house and off the bus at the other. Parents, don't be dongs. Just ask your kid. We might actually have something to say. I had a few. One guy had his wife served with the divorce papers while she was in the hospital undergoing cancer treatment. She had no idea he wanted a divorce. One guy wanted a provision in his divorce that said his sons couldn't watch NASCAR because the wife's new boyfriend was into NASCAR. In the same case, the property division was so contentious that the judge had the parties list every piece of furniture in the house and try to work through who would get what. The guy made sure that he wanted everything she did, down to things like lace doilies her grandma made and some trophy she won in a women's shooting competition. I bought her the gun, so it's pretty much my trophy. Another guy wanted no custody and no visitation with his 4 sons until he learned how much child support would be. Then he wanted full custody with no visitation for the wife and the hope that she'd have to pay him child support. I only did divorces for about a year before I moved on to mortgage foreclosures. Those are far less depressing. I was a secretary for an attorney. I think the most entertaining one was when a guy had to divorce his wife via newspaper because she wouldn't leave the house or answer the door for the process server. My parents' divorce was finalized September of 2014, but the separation of assets is still opened. The short of it is that my dad has always been really jealous. About 2 years ago, my dad got it in his head that my mom was cheating with a Baker police officer in our hometown, Mexico. He hired 2 guys to watch her 24/7. They confirmed that she was cheating and said they had a video. Well, $8K and my dad's sanity later. There's no video and my dad is mentally ill. He hired someone else to kill this Baker police officer. Thankfully they too just took his money and did not kill him. He started going to brothels and sexually harassing women. He said he would leave my mom on the streets and has attempted to pay off judges. My dad was always a good hard-working man. Now he is someone I don't know. Some say it's a midlife crisis, but the guy is 65 years old. I feel if it was a crisis it should have happened years ago. TLDR. My dad thinks he lives in Colombian novella. That's terrible and I feel awful for you, but it's possible your dad needs medical help. I'm no expert, but I've heard stories of people with family members around his age who underwent sudden personality changes, and it turned out to be early onset dementia, a tumor, or some other issue. The hard part is convincing him he needs care. I didn't handle the divorce, but I was working in a legal clinic and had a client seeking a protective order from her ex-husband. We had an initial interview and I got paperwork filed. Between filing and the scheduled hearing, she called me. She started rambling and when she calmed down, she told me her ex had been arrested for murdering his brother. Even with bigger fish to fry, he insisted on attending the protective order hearing while in custody, which is his right but a terrible idea because anything he says on the record can be used by prosecutors. He shows up in his prison jumpsuit and handcuffs and takes every opportunity to talk about how my client would get drunk and start fights with him and he had to give her a slap to shut her up. He's currently serving a life sentence after being convicted of second-degree murder and several other felonies. Divorce attorney here. The standard comment I make is that I represent good people in their worst moments. However, some cases seem like representing the worst people in their worst moments. I have a bunch of anecdotes, but the truly surreal case for me was a post-decree case. Was a husband sought reduction of his unallocated family support obligation after he was fired from a 6-figure salary as a public school principal. He was jerking off in his car while driving and was observed by most of the people in a school bus that was much higher than his car. The legal issue was whether his change in employment was in bad faith. After a 3-hour hearing, court felt that it was. He was jerking off in his car while driving and was observed by most of the people in a school bus that was much higher than his car. The legal issue was whether his change in employment was in bad faith. After a 3-hour hearing, court felt that it was. I agree. Most people know not to have a wank on school property, unless they are a student of course. My grandparents' divorce. I refused to help them with it or get involved. I think my only advice was to burn all of their possessions. It was truly awful. It went on for at least 4 years. My grandfather was a shopping addict and hoarder and step-grandmother left the minute that they ran out of cash. They then proceeded to fight about every object in their hoard, all while both being in the middle of dying. She was dying of cancer and Alzheimer's and he of diabetes and kidney failure. So it wasn't like they had some grand plan about how someone was going to use any of these objects. They owned basically nothing of actual value. My grandfather was just awful and wouldn't let her go. Did she know she was leaving? Not sure, and wrote her nasty letters weekly. After my grandfather died, my family threw away or donated virtually every last hammer, hat and book they fought over. What a waste of time and energy their whole divorce fiasco was. I'm sure they greatly annoyed their respective attorneys greatly. Far back on Reddit I saw a thread where the guy lost his house in the divorce but kept few land around it via some loophole. First he had all the trees logged and sold. Then he had the stumps ground and mulched. Then he sold the topsoil. He sold off the gravel. Then he sold off the clay until the house was left on a hill surrounded by rock. If someone knows the thread, please link it, it's great. I just had lunch with a lawyer friend of mine and he told me this crazy story. When he was an intern there was this divorce case where the woman was demanding her husband for child support. It was in a small city in Bolivia's highlands and both the husband and wife were shepherds. Anyways, the husband asked the judge for a medical examination of his genitalia. Turns out the husband was actually a woman. She was raised by her grandparents and they respected her preferences. For the rest of the community she was a boy. After her grandparents died she inherited the land and after some time the neighbor offered her to marry his daughter. Without knowing the guy was actually a girl. She accepted and once she was married she came to an agreement with her wife. They will be married but they won't have sex. After a while the wife got a lover and had 3 kids. The husband took them as his her own. Some years passed and the relationship got really deteriorated so the husband asked for a divorce. Things got ugly and she ended up telling the truth in order to avoid paying child support. That was a ride. My mum and dad's case was a giant head frick for me. The custody battle was just bad. I'm pretty sure my mum has a mental illness. She accused my dad of molesting me. Not true. So when they split, the court gave her custody. She had 2 other kids, both with different fathers, living with their fathers. For a reason. She was a druggy alcoholic prostitute. I got to visit my dad sometimes, but he had to always have a witness with him, and my mum would never be home half the time for him to pick me up. To this day I have no idea where she would have taken me. I suspect a dealer's place or a so-called boyfriend's place. So one day dad was going to take me to the zoo. We met at the train station and my mum then decided to argue and say I wasn't allowed to go. So 4-year-old me must have thought "nah frick you be," and I spat in her face. Dad was so proud. But he sorta told me off because he was actually a responsible parent. Eventually the court realized that this woman was in fact not capable of raising any of her children and was a train wreck. So the tables turned and dad had custody and I was to see her every so often. Any visitations were monitored by a social worker. She kinda disappeared for a few years though, and I eventually forgot what she looked like. A lot of my childhood memories have mostly been suppressed and forgotten. Eventually I asked if I could see my mum again. Court order was to see her every second weekend. Started off alright, but history began to repeat itself and I was exposed to a lot of violence during my teens. Not quite a divorce case, but it was close to being so. My dad did love my mum and was going to ask her to marry him. Lucky he didn't before that all happened. Not strictly divorces, but my family law professor had some good stories. Story 1. Client calls. "Hi, can I kick my pregnant girlfriend out of the house? You really shouldn't do that. But can I? Legally speaking, since you never married and the home is in your name, yes, you can legally exclude her, but you really freaking shouldn't. Thanks, I need you to explain that to someone." Client opens door, where police are getting ready with a ram. Hand cell phone to police officer. Story 2. Unmarried mum comes in and asks, "So, what do I have to do to get his house?" You really shouldn't be getting married if you're already planning to end the relationship. Yeah, but what do I have to do? Well, if you're married and live in the home, it become a matrimonial home and you have an equal right to possession upon divorce. Thanks. Client calls again. He wants me to sign a prenup. Well, this would limit what you would be able to get in a divorce, and it doesn't really give you anything. Why are you getting married if both you and he know that you're only in it to get his house? Okay, so I should sign it. Client calls again. Okay, we are married now, but he won't let me move in. Family law is crazy. A guest speaker in that course was beaten up by thugs for a ruling he made in a high-profile arbitration case. A man came into the family law firm my friend was working in and says his wife was cheating on him. He's extremely rich and wants to get divorced. The lawyer proceeds to ask him about his assets and what he wants to keep. He says that she can have the house, the car, the boat, the kids, etc. The lawyer asks him what he wants to keep then, given that he doesn't seem to want anything. The man angrily responds that B only loves her dog. I want her to suffer, so I want the court to order that the dog be taken away from her and cremated. She can have 50% of the ashes and I'll have the other 50%. Somehow this prince among men is getting divorced. And despite the crazy, somehow I'm still interested in practicing in family law. Not a lawyer, but saw what happened to my cousin. He got married at the start one year. During the year ended up needing surgery. Gets home and wife has left and taken all the stuff including the dog. They both owned a house each, but his was worth slightly more, so she made him pay her the difference in the settlement. But as a happy end to the story, he's now married to a lovely woman and they have 2 kids together. Someone in my family holds the state record for longest divorce proceedings. 30+ years of unrelenting fighting that divided the family into who talks to which parent, complete with long periods of not speaking to one another and family members not speaking to the people who won't speak to the family members that they like. The reverse too. Some people talk to the mom and some talk to the dad, but you can't talk to them both. Not allowed. God forbid you ever mention one to the other. It's a war and it totally fricked their kids, my mom and aunts uncles, up. It won't end until both parties are dead and in the ground. Getting my counseling license and taking legal ethics classes. One crazy story is while a lady is in her counseling session, her husband comes in and says to the receptionist that he's her husband and he won't be able to pick up the kids because he has to go into work right then, and could the receptionist let the client know when she gets out of the appointment? The receptionist says yes. When the client comes out of her appointment, the receptionist passes along the message and the client says, "Are you serious? He isn't supposed to know I'm here. We're in the middle of a divorce and he's crazy." TLDR. Train receptionists to say I can neither confirm or deny that person is a client. Not an attorney, but I do title research and including divorce cases in reports is part of my job. I came across a case in Ohio from the early 1900s in which the wife jabbed her husband in the rectum with a hot poker, made him sleep in the barn for several months, had his sons beat the crap out of him, and she still got the farm in the divorce. Her defense was that he was a drunk, which was enough for the judge, apparently. Before you testify to crap in any civil suit, bear in mind that it's public record and some butthole like me is gonna come along 100 years later and laugh at your butt, so to speak. I know that was 115 years ago, but that abuse sounds horrific and I hope he is safe in heaven. I work in civil litigation, so not divorce, but I had a case where part of the issue was the previous dangerous behavior of plaintiff's dogs. My client believed that part of plaintiff's divorce involved not allowing the dogs around plaintiff's kids, so we filed to unseal the divorce settlement agreement. The divorce was between two lawyers and it was a doozy of a settlement. They had 2 single-space pages dedicated to splitting up family stuffed animals. It was pretty heartbreaking to read who would be getting things like Boots the bear. Oh dear God, I can't even begin to imagine. I've seen theater couples try to act together. I've seen tech couples try to program together. But holy crap. 2 lawyers trying to rip their respective lives back apart. I'd imagine there have been multinational wars with less collateral damage. My sister works at a family law firm. Some lady was divorcing her husband, and after the mediation he called back the next day saying he was going to kill her and everyone at the firm. So I'd say he handled it well. He sounds like a catch. I wonder why she wanted to divorce him. Yes, finally my moment to shine. A mother US citizen who took her child from Argentina and ran back to the US child born in AR. I represented the Argentine father husband. Federal court, Argentine gov got involved, made the news in Buenos Aires. We won and had child returned to father in Argentina. Also represented a woman who was convinced that her husband had implanted micro robots into her brain and was trying to control her. She would bring us all these nanotech articles trying to convince us that it was possible. She dragged the case out for 4 years, convinced that he has done all kinds of illegal stuff, like destroyed her car brakes so she would crash and putting poison into her tap water. She was nuts. We almost had to get a conservator for her estate. My first divorce case was the most memorable. My client was a nice looking, 50-ish waitress who was breaking hearts at the local small town cafe. She was on divorce number 5. I had a little lawyer kit of things she should do: clean out the joint accounts, change the car title, etc. She had done all of them, plus a few things neither I nor the professional list maker had thought of. Husband number 5 came into my office to cry and concede everything. Now that was a guy who needed a lawyer with a list. No such luck. She fricked him over gently, professionally, I thought, didn't overreach too much, but got everything she was or might have been entitled to, plus a little more. It was easy peasy for me. Helps if your first time is with an experienced woman. I learned a lot. Helps if your first time is with an experienced woman. I learned a lot. I find this is true about a lot of things. Day 58 of the 60 days it took for my parents' divorce to be final. My dad called my mom at work and begged her to call it off and take him back. She said no. He went from sad and crying to pee, saying, "So this is how you want things." About an hour and a half later, my mom got another phone call from someone letting her know that our house was on fire. It was arson, of course. I wish that's the worst I could say about their divorce. Sounds like she was right to divorce him. My sister is a divorce lawyer and I remember she once told me about a case she handled where the wife kept cheating on the husband with younger dudes, and one day the husband had enough and decided to beat her repeatedly and sent her to the hospital. What a story, Mark. Not a lawyer, but I'm sure the divorce lawyers for my parents could write a lot. Both my parents are stubborn and often irrational. For example, my dad accused my mom of being a negligent parent for giving me chocolate chip cookies. My mom accused my dad of breaking into her house to replace my antidepressants with sugar pills. I had a weird childhood. I wonder why you were taking antidepressants. It sounds like such a wonderful childhood. I worked on a case where the other party's statement of property listed every individual food item in the house at the date of separation. Campbell's condensed tomato soup, $0.59. I was a family law attorney for years. It is nasty all the time, which is why I finally switched to a different area. Nasty. One parental alienation cases just make you want to hurt someone. Those poor kids are brainwashed. It is beyond cruel. Had one where the little kid was so brainwashed she would scream at the top of her lungs if she even saw a picture of the other parent. Everyone knew she was brainwashed, but the options are few when the kid is so fricked up. Are you really going to force the kid to live with a parent they hate? These cases frick you up. 2 had several where dad didn't give a frick about ever seeing his kids, but grandmother wanted him to get some custody out of principle and was bankrolling to destroy her. 3 so much child abuse. Silly. 1 had a 10-hour mediation over a few dirty pans that originally came from Walmart. By the end I almost waived the fee to buy my client new pans to end the pain everyone else had to endure. 2 had a divorce where they still lived together because neither wanted to move. I believe they still live together several years later. They hated each other, so I don't understand, but their choice. 3 most clients destroy their own case, make the judge hate them by being terrible. I have had to tell them shut up more times than I can count. The husband in the case broke into the wife's, our client, home, poisoned some of her food, and left. She went to the hospital and ended up being perfectly okay, thankfully. I interned for a small family law firm in Virginia last summer and had 2 really odd stories. 1. This attractive lady came in seeking a divorce. Before divorcing, she and her husband moved into a house in the Virginia mountains with her parents, as they were relocating from Florida to Virginia to start their relationship over and had not found a new place to live yet. She had found his personal classified ads on Craigslist. If I remember correctly, well, crap keeps hitting the fan, and he kicks her out of her parents' house. You read that correctly. 2. Another crazy story was surrounding a mid-40s couple that got remarried. All of their children from their respective first marriages were grown up. Anyways, they decide to adopt 3 kids from some African county. At first they think the 2 girls and 1 boy are brother-sister, but end up being 2 sisters and a cousin. The kids had apparently seen some awful crap back in Africa. All their parents were dead or drug addicts, etc. Anyways, they all have terrible manners that they won't fix. Eating with their hands at the table, bad hygiene, obnoxious, etc. However, the really sad part was the older girl, around 11-12 years old. She was sexually assaulted, raped in Africa, and she had become sexually reactive. This means she was masturbating all the time, in public, and even once made her sister perform oral sex on her, which the mother found them doing in the bathtub. A really sad story. Told this one before, but it bears repeating and is also pretty crazy, at least in my opinion. I'm a land use and real estate lawyer, but a friend's friend is, or at least was, a divorce family lawyer. My friend once told me a story wherein my friend's divorce lawyer friend was attacked by a client's former spouse while doing his grocery shopping at a local supermarket with his wife and kids. The former spouse attacker has blamed the divorce attorney for taking him to the cleaners and for the downward spiral that followed the divorce. Last I heard, the lawyer who was assaulted in the grocery store decided to change practice areas. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Criminal lawyers often work with the worst people on their best behavior. Family lawyers often work with the best people on their worst behavior. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.